I want all of you to know that Sheikh Surkheel, he's joining us very shortly after his wife passed away. Allah yarhamha. And he's still kept to this particular seminar for all of you. So perhaps we could read Al-Fatiha for her. May Allah bless her and raise her to the highest stations, inshallah. Al-Fatiha. Baqa lillah, ya Sidi. May Allah grant to the highest stations, inshallah. Ameen, ya Rabb.
Barakallah feekum to you
all. So, Sheikh Surkheel, mashallah, is an old friend. I'm very gratified to be able to say. We first met, as I think I told all of you, almost 20 years ago, 2005, early 2006. And he's one of the main figures in the history books in terms of the spreading of the Salafi da'wah in the UK and by extension the West more generally, but has also taken, a number of different steps, particularly, after 2005. There's a great scholar, somebody who, unlike, as I discussed with you earlier today, unlike some others who, when they left the Salafi da'wah, kind of went on a strange offensive that was quite dogmatic in its own way. But Sheikh Surkheel was not like that, and has a lot to tell about his time, but just in terms of how the da'wah in the West evolved and emerged. And I'm really very happy and very grateful that he was able to spare the time, inshallah, to speak with all of you today. Sheikh Surkheel, you've got a very interesting audience here of imams and chaplains and people involved in Muslim establishments in the United States. And we're very grateful to you again for making the time. And I look forward to the questions that you will get later on, but even more so, of course, your answers to them. So I will just move this slightly out of the way so that we don't interfere with the recording. Just put that over there. And the floor is yours for as long as you want it. We're a captive audience with great pleasure. Thank you. Bismillah.
Allah bless you. Barakallahu feekum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa barak ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah. Wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. So, the level that I'm speaking at now, is that sufficient for you? Can you all hear me clearly?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. I'd like to thank Bayan Institute and particularly to Dr. Hisham for giving me this invitation, this opportunity to engage with you all. Truth be told, as I mentioned to Dr. Hisham, I'm not quite sure how to pitch this. So a few months back, I asked him, how do you think I should pitch this talk? And he said, actually, any which way you want to. However you wish to engage this issue, Bismillah, it's up to you. Which left me even more perturbed, because there's 101 ways to do this. I think it might help. I suspect rather it might help if I just give you a very brief background to myself. There's nothing to fly the flag about. There's nothing great or anything about my background. There are just one or two relevant points for this engagement. The first of them is, which Dr. Hisham mentioned, that back in the early 80s, 83, winter of 83, going into 84, I born into a Muslim family, do the usual born into the Muslim family stuff. That's definitely Jummah prayers, and that's definitely Eid prayers. But beyond that, and beyond few dietary rules, there wasn't much Islam. But by 83, 84, I began taking my Islam seriously with a small group of brothers. And we knew one or two things that we didn't want to become. We didn't want to become another group and to further divide the Muslims, even as kind of non-practicing or half-baked Muslims. We understood, and what we didn't like is the divisions that we perceived Muslims to already have, whether that was Sunni Shia divisions or whether that was divisions within Sunni Islam. We just thought, why can't we be one? So we didn't want to form another group. And the second thing is we wanted to sort out cultural Islam from the real Islam, if that was at all possible. We felt even then back in 83 that cultural Islam has kind of gone past its sell-by date. And there's got to be a bit more of a genuine Islam than kind of a Southeast Asian, Indian, Pakistani predominantly Islam. At that time, I knew of no Muslim who was not an Asian or an Arab Muslim in the UK. That 1983, 84, gradually towards the end of the 80s, 88, maybe 89, gradually morphed into a distinctive Salafism centered around, at that time, the three major scholars of the then Salafi movement, those being, and I'm sure you're all familiar with the names, Sheikh Ibn Abbas, Sheikh Al-Albani, and Sheikh Ibn Uthaymeen. May Allah have mercy upon them all. And then thereafter, it was just the journey was whatever the journey was. We also had a policy as this undefined group of brothers and a growing number of sisters that we wouldn't take any money from anyone, even if it's halal, even if it's lawful, taking money from other Muslims, other Muslim states and countries, other Muslim organizations, or even non-Muslims in your local area who give money for project. The local council, the local government give money for all sorts of projects for minority communities. And that money was deemed to be halal long before I started practicing by our scholars. We decided we wouldn't touch any of that, simply because we've seen too many people get their hands tied through money, and money, we understood, causes a bit of schism whenever religion and money come together. It's kind of the case of never the twain shall meet. There's always a rocky marriage. And so that's how we started. And then it just evolved into Salafism. So I was one of the main speakers, and as genuine as I think I was, and Allah knows best my intentions, the inward, the batin is always a murky ground that needs to be tamed and trained. But nonetheless, one feels that they were sincere in the ballpark. We were calling to not just the Quran and Sunnah, which was the initial call, but now the Quran and Sunnah with that addition upon the way of the Salaf. And we thought that that's the right way. By 1991, I had my first major doubt about whether contemporary Salafism represents the real deal. And by 1993, 94, I was trying to weave my way into a more traditional understanding of Hanbalism, not just Hanbali fiqh or Hanbali law, but Hanbali creed, the creed of the majority of the Hanbalis over the last 1,000 years or so, and spirituality as well, suluk, tazkiyah, tasawwuf, whatever we wish to identify this nebulous term spirituality as. So that's where I'm going to come to you from. And then I thought, how can we engage the topic? Well, here's my suggestion. And if any one of you have a real strong passion for it to be done another way, I'm still open to suggestions, and maybe I can tweak the talk in order to fulfill what you want from it. But I thought that Salafism is a popular topic in not just amongst Muslims, but in Western academia and Islamic studies. And also the securitization industry, especially after 9/11. And people discuss Salafism even now in books and lectures and fancy conferences. They discuss it as a socio-religious contemporary Islamic movement from that perspective. Salafism, Ikhwan al-Muslimun, and the various other groups and parties and movements. They discuss Salafism as theology, contrasted to Ash'arism, for example, or Maturidism. And they discuss it as I said, issues of securitization and community cohesion. So those are some of the well-known ways that Salafism is discussed, and I don't really actually want to do kind of any of that per se. I'll take a less glamorous way of discussing Salafism, unless anyone has any great objection. I'd like to discuss Salafism as Salafism sees itself. How does contemporary Salafism, with its major scholars and figures, how does it see itself? What type of claims does it make and why? And could we possibly weigh those claims or contrast those claims with a more classical, more traditional reading of Islam? I've recently written a book. I completed it about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, and it's called, currently the working title is Salafism Reconsidered. And initially it was just under 600 pages with 998 footnotes. But over the last year, I've kind of trimmed it down to like a 350-page book, which I hope is going to be more manageable. So I do understand that there is a lot of ground to cover, and I won't be able to cover even a 10th, even a 20th of it, nor will I be able to satisfy every person in the audience, all of you, from your different experiences, backgrounds, understanding, and more importantly, why you've come here today to listen to this topic. You may have many shared reasons why you're listening to engaging this topic with me, but you may also have specific reasons that aren't shared by anyone else in the room. And I don't know what they are, and nor am I meant to know. So I'm going to come at it from a generic way, looking at how Salafism, contemporary Salafism, and I say contemporary Salafism, Salafiyya Mu'asara, contemporary Salafism, contrasting it with the idea of the word Salafi as an adjective, not as a noun, not as an ism, not as a noun, I am Salafi, but as an adjective, a describing word. This is the Salafi creed, Salafi mu'taqid, Salafi aqidah. The latter description, Salafi mu'taqid, Salafi aqidah, where the word Salafi is an adjective, it describes a noun. That is there in classical books, mainly of theology and history, well before scholars like Ibn Taymiyyah. It's not there a lot, where a scholar describes a 4th century Islamic scholar, a 3rd century Islamic scholar as وَكَانَ Salafi mu'taqid. He was Salafi in his creed or aqidah. And though that description isn't there a lot, it is there enough of the times. But we now use the word Salafism or Salafi as a noun, not just describing an aqidah, describing an actual way or a way in itself. So contemporary Salafism I want to distinguish that from something which was more classical, whereby there was a Salafi creed or Athari creed or Ahlul Hadith creed, Aqidah. Salafi, Athari, Ahlul Hadith. These are and Hanbali. These are four synonymous terms in the classical literature identifying the same core set of beliefs by people ascribing to Sunni Islam. This is just a factual matter. It's not something subjective that I think is the case. It's just a matter of fact. Just like it's a matter of fact, Chicago in the United States is 6 hours behind London in the United Kingdom. It's just a fact. It's not subjective. Likewise, there was a creedal orientation defined in the literature, sometimes as Ahlul Hadith, sometimes as Salafi, sometimes as Athari, sometimes as Hanbali, all synonymously meaning the same thing. And by the 4th Islamic century, that term or those terms were in opposition or were in direct contrast to Ash'ari creed or Ash'ari scholars and Aqidah. But today I'm going to talk about contemporary Salafism, how it sees itself, and I'm going to start the time equals zero, T equals zero for contemporary Salafism at the time of a scholar called Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. Depending upon which side of the fence you sit, he's either a notorious scholar or a glorious scholar. Nonetheless, a scholar. And he dies in like 1792 of the Common Era, just at the end of the 18th century, which is 1206 Hijri. So, you know, we're in 1446 Hijri, so about 200, just under 250 years ago, 250 years ago, this man in the central Saudi Arabia, in the Najd province, started a movement and an activism espousing certain ideas and beliefs about Islam and particularly about Tawheed, the oneness of God. And we can really say, for practical purposes, that is the beginning of what we can identify as contemporary Salafism. Yes, it can trace a lot of its pedigree back to Imam Ibn Taymiyyah in the 8th Islamic century. And yes, Ibn Taymiyyah and a few people around him can trace their pedigree and their scholarly tradition back to imams like Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, died in the 3rd Islamic century in the year 241 Hijri. But contemporary Salafism actually redefined things and moved the goalposts such that Ibn Taymiyyah falls foul of many established contemporary Salafi ideas, and Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal falls even fouler of such ideals. They wouldn't even make the mark to be considered really proper contemporary Salafis, even though they are held in the highest esteem by Salafis in general, no doubt. So that's how we're going to look at it. Rather than quote some scholar who is in opposition to Ibn Abdul Wahhab or contemporary Salafism, or some scholar who was in opposition to Ibn Taymiyyah in his time, let's actually quote directly from leading voices, leading scholars of contemporary Salafism in 4 broad issues. 1, does contemporary Salafism actually follow the Salaf? That's the first question. Two, looking at Salafism as it sees itself, that it is the only group that is the safe sect. Every other Muslim is, to larger or lesser extent, deviants and misguided innovators. Three, how does contemporary Salafism see the rest of the Ummah? And finally, four, a quick look at Ibn Abdul Wahhab and his evolution of mass takfir, not just takfir, declaring a Muslim to be a non-Muslim, throwing them outside of the fold of Islam, but actually mass takfir. So not just an individual, and not just groups of individuals, whole towns, whole areas, sometimes whole cities, and in one case, a whole country. You are now outside of the fold of Islam. You are an apostate. How Ibn Abdul Wahhab and his evolution of mass takfir. So those are the four things. Does Salafism follow the Salaf? How does Salafism see itself? Secondly, Salafis and their view of the rest of the Ummah. That's third. And fourth, Ibn Abdul Wahhab and an evolution of mass takfir, or his evolution of mass takfir. He doesn't start like that, but he does get there quite quickly. Okay, so before I move on, is there anything that someone thought, no, I thought we were going to discuss X, Y, or Z? And if so, could you mention what it is and maybe I can weave it in? Are we generally okay with the trajectory for this morning, or in my case, this afternoon?
Yes, yes, yes.
Perfect. Allah bless you. Okay. So does Salafism follow the Salaf? You know, it sounds like a really odd thing. And when I still do, I still have lots and lots of Salafi friends, as did my late wife, and not just friends amongst the kind of the foot soldiers, but amongst the Salafi ulama, scholars, Salafi sheikhs and Salafi da'is. And I've always found, even after I was drifting away from it, I've always found so much the potential for so much good in Salafi brothers and sisters. Not all. There are some horror stories. Every kind of group has its horror stories. And maybe it's a subjective thing. There's no hard proof, but maybe today's Salafis have more horror stories amongst them than other Islamic groups. Who knows? Maybe. I mean, it certainly comes across like that, but I couldn't give you a definitive, solid proof for it. So it's quite subjective to state that. I still find a lot of good. And when I say a lot of good, I mean in terms of commitment to Islam, the sense of sincerity to what they believe is correct, the respect and the veneration that they can have to those who they believe are scholars, and more importantly, their willingness, their patience, their endurance, their courage to swim against the tide if they believe the tide is flowing the wrong way. And that's quite a remarkable quality for anyone to have in this age, to go against the grain. Modernity kind of hammers us all to kind of just go with the flow, and kind of becomes, we're programmed in our DNA to do that. Islam, if anything, we're not talking about Salafism, we're talking about Islam, as the Prophet ﷺ taught us, if anything, is the great voice of dissent in our day and age. Okay? We're being invited to worship so many things, including our own selves and egos. And the dissenting voice of Islam says, no, none has the right to be worshipped except Allah. We're being told that money and materialism is the only way to go. and the great dissenting voice of Islam says actually true human happiness and true human joy is by reaching inward contentment attached to Allah. So actually every Muslim, our mandate is to be prophetically inspired voices of dissent in this day and age, to hold up to modernity a mirror so that it can begin to see itself for what it truly is. To restore the remembrance of Allah back into the hearts of those who have lost the plot. That's really what a Muslim is today, should be today. Salafism, however, over the last 30 years, when I've engaged various levels of Salafi brothers and sisters and sheikhs, those who have graduated from the Islamic University of Medina or from Riyadh University, and those Salafi foot soldiers who can't read Arabic and, you know, just do their dawah or just live their life in a kind of Salafi way, it's very rare to find a Salafi who understands what it means as a concept to follow the Salaf. They all have their answers. The most common answer is to be a Salafi is to try to emulate the Salaf in how they lived Islam in as many areas of life as possible. And whilst that's a very nice explanation, it is not a definition, nor is it a definition that we find in our books of theology in the classical times. It's not a definition Ibn Taymiyyah ever conceived of. It's not even a definition Ibn Abdul Wahhab actually worked with. It might be a nice thing to do, but it was never, oh, a Salafi is a person who emulates the Salaf in as many things in their life as possible, or many fields or areas. No, that's just a nice rule of thumb, maybe. Impractical, because modernity insists that you can't live a pre-modern life, period. So no one could do that. But that's not the definition. Rather, let's take our first statement. It's a long statement of Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, and he kind of tells us in this statement what is orthodoxy, Islamic orthodoxy. So he's doing what in Western academia might be called, or in Greek philosophy might be called, soteriology. He's talking about what makes someone saved and what are the deeds or beliefs that make someone reach salvation. So now we're talking about the saved path of the saved sect. So Ibn Taymiyyah says this. I'll read it in English and then I'll just quote one line in Arabic, which is the main thing. And it's from his Majmu' al-Fatawa, his well-known collection of fatwas. I won't give the volume and page number because even if we have, you might have it at home, and I have it on my shelf. Well, you can't see the top of the bookshelf. It's there, but we might have different editions. So it's no point saying me saying volume 3, page 345 to 346, because you might have a different edition than I, or you might be going online. Okay, but it's from Majmu' al-Fatawa, and he says this. This is why the saved sect is described as Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. They are the great multitude and the overwhelming majority of Muslims. As for the other sects, they are followers of aberrant opinions. They are the followers of aberrant opinions, schisms, innovations, and deviant desires. None even comes close to the number of the saved sect, let alone its caliber. Rather, each one of these deviant sects is extremely small in number. And then Ibn Taymiyyah says, وَشِعَارُ هَذِهِ الْفِرْقِ مَفَارَقَةُ الْكِتَابِ وَالسُّنَّةِ وَالْإِجْمَاعِ. The hallmark of these deviant sects is their splitting from the book, the Quran, the Sunnah, and Ijma', the consensus of the Muslim scholars, the hallmark of these deviant sects is their splitting from the book, the sunnah, and the ijma', the consensus, the unanimous agreement of the Muslim scholars. فَمَنْ قَالَ بِكِتَابِ وَالسُّنَّةِ وَالْإِجْمَاعِ كَانَ مِنْ أَهْلِ السُّنَّةِ وَالْجَمَاعَةِ. But whoever speaks with the book, the sunnah, and the ijma' is from Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Okay, so to cut a very long story indecently short, more or less from before the time of Imam Ahmad and Imam Shafi'i, Sunni Islam, Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, those who chose to follow the way of the earliest Salaf, the companions and their students, the Tabi'un, said, look, it's not enough to say Quran and Sunnah, because these other deviant Muslim sects also sometimes or often say Quran and Sunnah. And these deviant Muslim sects also sometimes try to prove their views with a quote from the Quran or a hadith from the Prophet. But what distinguishes the right way in Islam from the wrong way in Islam is consensus, ijma'. When the scholars of Islam unite upon something being right or wrong, then that united opinion, not majority opinion, no, united, unanimous consensus is truth. Because the Prophet ﷺ says, as I'm sure many of you, if not all of you are aware, لا يجتمع أمتي على الضلالة. My ummah, meaning the scholars of my ummah, will not unite upon an error. Hadith in the Sunan of Tirmidhi. Scholars generally consider the hadith to be at minimum hasan, a sound hadith. My ummah, meaning the scholars of my ummah, will not unite upon an error. Meaning whenever they do unite upon a unanimous opinion, it's always right guidance, never misguidance. Okay? There aren't many places in which the scholars of the Ummah have united. If you take all the Islamic issues of the world, and let's just pretend that all of the Islamic issues amounted to 5,000, then actually maybe less than 200, less than 100 of them are agreed upon issues. The rest are differed about amongst the Muslims. Okay, I mean that's just don't take it for gospel, as they say. I mean it's just a rough kind of idea to show you how many issues they have united upon compared to how much they have legitimately differed on, and legitimate differences become celebrated because of it. So actually, to follow the Salaf, as you probably all know, actually just mean following the ijma' of the Salaf. When the Sahaba or their students, the Tabi'un, or their students, the Atba'u Tabi'un, agreed upon an issue, especially in the issue of creed or aqidah, that became the way of the Salaf. Where they differed, then there was no way of the Salaf. There was just one, or there was just 2, 3, or 4 opinions amongst the Salaf. There's no one way of the Salaf. So, for example, without getting into the theology, by the time of Imam Ahmad, just before the time of Imam Ahmad, one of the deviant Muslim groups brought up an issue about the Quran being created. I'm not talking about the Quran that is printed in Saudi Arabia or Malaysia or Pakistan. I'm talking about the Quran as the speech of Allah is created. And by Imam Ahmad's time, there was a consensus that this is a misguided view. The Quran is the word of Allah, and all of Allah's qualities or attributes are uncreated. Allah is not a created entity, nor are his attributes. And the attribute of speech or kalam, which the Quran is kalamullah, speech of God, is likewise uncreated. There is a consensus upon that was reached either just before Imam Ahmad's time or during the time he was alive. And whether it's Abu Hanifa, whether it's Malik, whether it's Shafi, whether it's Imam Ahmad, whether it's Al-Bukhari, whether it's Al-Awza'i, whether it's Sufyan al-Thawri, whether it's whoever amongst the early Imams and mujtahid scholars, none of them dissented from this view. We can say that is the way of the Salaf. But, I'll give you an example. Just picking on any random example. Should I fold my hands in prayer? Should I fold my hands just slightly above my navel, slightly below my navel, or let them hang by the sides? Then when we go to Imam Tirmidhi's Sunan Tirmidhi, which is an excellent early, it's not just a hadith collection, he gives a snippet of the fiqh, the issues of law and fiqh of the Salaf. Then we find that he says that they differed. He said a group of them said that it's preferred to place it above the navel. A group of them said below the navel. And a group of the Medinan scholars said hanging by the side. So there is no way of the Salaf. There are just different opinions from the Salaf on this issue. But the first issue, the Quran being the word of God uncreated, that is the way of the Salaf, the Salafi way, to use the famous phrase. It's the Salafi way. But where to fold the hands, there is no Salafi way. There are just individual opinions that the Salaf took. One of them is going to be more right than the others. One of them is going to have 2 rewards and the other 1 reward, but it's all going to be valid. Okay, if that's clear, let's ask the question, what does it mean to follow the way of the Salaf? So what does it mean to be Salafi? All it meant in the classical literature is, I am a person who, when I find the Salaf have an ijma, a consensus, a unanimous agreement upon something, I bind myself to it. It's binding upon me. And when they legitimately differ, then if I'm one of those great scholars who can weigh up the proofs, I follow what I believe is the stronger. And if I'm just an ordinary Muslim who has no such skill sets, I trust the scholar who I follow. That's it. And I'm in safe grounds. I'm in safe pastures. But Salafism today is how you might wear your hijab or niqab. It might be identified by how long or short your beard is, how long and short your trouser or lower garment is, whether you pray in a particular way, whether you celebrate the Mawlid of the Prophet ﷺ or not, whether you use tasbih beads, dhikr beads or not. And none of that has ever been distinguishing of what the way of the Salaf was until contemporary Salafism came along. Not even Ibn Abdul Wahhab. Jump forward 100 years after him, and it really only happens with Bin Baz and Al-Albani and Ibn Uthaymeen. The goalposts shift so unrecognizably that you can now define yourself as Salafi by things which are legitimate differences of opinion, and there is no ijma on them. There is no ijma that you can't use tasbih beads. In fact, Imam Shawkani says we know of no major scholar of Islam who has ever forbidden it. Ibn Taymiyyah says, as long as your intention isn't to show off, he was talking about people when they, especially, like you still find it in certain parts of West Africa, they don't have pockets in their gowns, so they put their tasbih bead around their neck. Ibn Taymiyyah says if they do that to show off that they're pious, using a dhikr bead is bad. But if they have sound intention and they use dhikr beads just to count the names of Allah and dhikr, then fahuwa ahsan, then this is an excellent thing. But until someone like Al-Albani comes along and says, "Oh, it's bid'ah and dalala," or at least he says it's bid'ah, it's just a wicked innovation. We never heard such an opinion from any major imam up until the 20th century. Okay, it's a newly invented opinion. I don't want us to focus on the dhikr beads or where to fold the hands in prayer. I want us to focus on what it meant in the classical literature to follow the Salaf. It didn't mean to follow one of them. Oh, I'm following Abu Hanifa or Malik or Shafi or Ahmed. It meant to follow all of them when they all had a collective way. Okay, and that collective way in the language of Islam, or in its technical language, is called ijma', jama'a, to gather upon something, to unite upon something. And we can call that consensus. Okay. And what did mainstream Islam do? Mainstream Islam, as Ibn Qudama, the great Hanbali scholar, the great Athari, truly Salafi scholar, said, talking about the Salaf, he said, إجماعهم حجة قاطعة واختلافهم رحمة واسعة. Their ijma', their unanimous agreement, hujjatun qati'a, is a decisive and binding proof. Whoever goes against the ijma', at the minimum, he's deviant. There are some cases where he leaves the fold of Islam, but let's just stick with the first bit. He's outside of orthodoxy. Still a Muslim, but outside of orthodoxy. Their consensus is a decisive proof. وَاخْتِلَافُهُمْ, and their differing, rahmatun wasi'ah, is a comprehensive mercy. Okay. When two scholars differ, and these are qualified major imams, and they differ over this, the understanding of the same verse or the understanding of the same hadith, for example, and they come to two different conclusions, it means that there's a little bit of flexibility. And their scholarly disagreement is considered a rahmah, a mercy. Okay. Today, the tragedy is those who self-define, who are card-carrying Salafis, who self-define as Salafi, who wear the t-shirt, or they don't wear the t-shirt, but in concept, they are Salafi. It's almost impossible to find someone who will say, yeah, Salafi means to follow the Salaf, and what it means is to follow the ijma' of the Salaf. What Salafis tend to do, and they do this with no bad intention, is that they end up following contemporary scholars on an issue, contemporary Salafi scholars, the Bin Bazes, the Albanis, the Ibn Uthaymins of the world, and back project that and say that's the way of the Salaf. But classical Islam says, no, there is no way of the Salaf, of the pious predecessors, unless there is a consensus amongst them. Not following one of them or two of them or 10 of them, all of them on an issue that they're united on. So in the origin story of contemporary Salafism, they're at fault. Once your basis is wrong, everything that springs from that plant, from that source, is going to be erroneous in some sense or the other. I'll give you an example, and I'm not trying to mock. As I said, I have invested too much of my my adult life, and I have great hope in the potential that lies with so many of these Salafi brothers and sisters. That's my experience, even though you can come up against brick walls as you do. For example, last month, the month of Rabi al-Awwal, the month of the Mawlid or the Milad of the Prophet ﷺ, all around the world, Muslims are getting up on the pulpit and either saying celebrate the Mawlid and rejoice in the sending of the Prophet ﷺ, or warning against celebrating the yearly Mawlid. In the UK, and I suspect it's very much like the United States, although I think you don't have the Urdu khutbahs as bad, either our khutbahs, the majority of our khutbahs up and down the country are still in Urdu. Okay. What second generation or third generation Muslim speaks Urdu, God knows. And even first generation Muslims in the UK weren't all Urdu speaking. They were Gujarati, they were Bengali, they were Punjabi, whatever. Anyway, so we still have that problem. But we also have a large amount of mosques who do in English, a little bit of Arabic, but majority English khutbah, local language. Okay. And a rather strange phenomenon happens every year in Rabi al-Awwal, like it did, in September/October. Here you got a Salafi sheikh, Salafi scholar, and we're now talking about it here in the West, where the khutbah is going to be, say, in English or a European language. And here is a Salafi scholar or a Salafi da'i. He's warning the congregation. The Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba never ever celebrated the Mawlid. Therefore, it's a bid'ah. It must be shunned. And the Salafi brother or sheikh doesn't see the irony of it, that he is given a khutbah in English that neither the Prophet ﷺ nor the companions nor anyone else for 1,400 years of Islam. So at least with the Mawlid, we can say for the first 500 years of Islam, there was no yearly celebration. Then somewhere in the middle of the 6th century, in the year 540, 560, 580, somewhere in the Iraq province, some king said, hey, let's celebrate the yearly Mawlid of the Prophet. And he actually got the endorsement of many righteous scholars, not government stooges, real scholars. And as the years and decades went on, more and more and more and more scholars agreed with the opinion that, yeah, we can celebrate the yearly Mawlid of the Prophet ﷺ. So let's say from the 6th Islamic century, it was being celebrated. But we haven't had a khutbah in other than Arabic being done, except in the 20th and the 21st century. And yet I can, as a Salafi, stand up on the pulpit and say, it's a bid'ah to celebrate the Mawlid because the Prophet and the Sahaba and the Salaf didn't do it, not realizing that I am actually doing something as ibadah, as worship, which the Prophet and the Salaf didn't do, which is a khutbah in non-Arabic. Now, someone was, as a Salafi, might say, yeah, but I have my fiqh proofs. I have proofs in my fiqh why you can do a non-Arabic. Fine, we're not arguing whether we can or can't. We're just saying that your definition that it's a bid'ah because the Prophet and the Sahaba didn't do it, or the Prophet and the Salaf didn't do it, that definition of bid'ah is itself a bid'ah. No scholar, not even Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, ever defined bid'ah in this way. Never. But this is a linchpin of contemporary Salafism. And they don't see the irony or the contradiction because once you... the reality is once you're on a method of unthinking and once you've surrendered all your critical faculties over to a clique or a group or a hizb, you can't see the wood through the trees. It's not an outward issue of learning more hadiths, learning some more fiqh, strengthening your Arabic. It's a matter of inward purification. The nafs has been so eroded, has been so sullied that it can't see its own obvious internal contradictions that everybody else can see. It's a bit like non-Muslims and Muslims in Ramadan. So I don't know how you lot in the States do it, but we have a real funny way of doing Ramadan, and it's getting better, but it's been so odd and ironic that non-Muslims since the mid-1990s in the national newspapers were speaking about it, which is what? When Muslims are fasting, and one of the things we say is we fast, one of the benefits is we begin to feel what the poor are feeling. The other thing is we have a little bit of self-control. The other thing is it's like a detox for the body because we're not eating so much. And the non-Muslims used to say, wow, that's fantastic. Wow, brilliant. Yes, amazing. I wish we could do something like that. And then they quickly caught on, hold on. But you Muslims consume, and this is now an actual established fact across the world, majority Muslim countries and minority Muslim communities in the West. It's an established sociological fact. We Muslims consume more food in the month of Ramadan than we do outside of the month of Ramadan. So everybody can see the kind of double standards, but you and I as Muslims, we can't see it. Salafism has a thing like that. I've taken a lot of time on the first one. Let me be brief on the second, third, and fourth, inshallah. So does Salafism follow the Salaf? The answer to that is unfortunately a really roaring no. One, because the concept of following the ijma of the Salaf is not clear amongst Salafis. And secondly, more importantly, someone like Sheikh Al-Albani, Sheikh Muqbil, and other Salafi sheikhs, they rejected the concept of ijma of the ulama. Sheikh Al-Albani said, ijma of the ulama is a myth. It's not true, never happened. Imam Ahmad, Imam Shafi, Imam Bukhari, Imam this, Imam Nawawi, Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn this, Ibn that, and all of these ulama said, yes, it happened, and we've got recorded examples of it in the great books. But Al-Albani comes and says, never happened. I don't believe ijma is binding. Bin Baz and Ibn Uthaymeen believe ijma is binding, but in practice, under this revisionist influence, they have ruled with a few rulings that go against an ijma. And I'll just give you one example. Not surprising that Al-Albani believes that blood, if I cut my palm or my finger and blood oozes out quite a bit, not a little trickle, but let's say just oozes out, then by ijma, that blood that flows from the wound is najis, is impure. The question of whether I can pray with it or not is a separate question. But the blood itself is considered to be najis, impure. It is not tahir. There is an ijma upon this. Al-Albani doesn't believe in the ijma. He holds this blood to be pure, tahir, against the ijma, but he doesn't believe in the ijma of the Salaf as a principle. Ibn Uthaymeen believes in the ijma of the Salaf as a principle, but he too mistakenly says blood is from a flowing wound, flowing blood from a wound is pure, is tahir. Against the ijma, as stated by Ibn Taymiyyah, as stated by Imam Ahmad, as stated by Imam Nawawi, as stated by Ibn Abdul Barr, as stated by more or less everybody from the great scholars of the past. Now, we might think that's just a small issue. Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't, because it's to do with wudu, and wudu is to do with prayer. But more importantly, it's to do with a principle. Change the principle and you could change the religion. So all the other aberrant and odd fatwas that Sheikh Al-Albani has said, once you understand he doesn't believe in ijma, then you understand why he says gold is forbidden to women in circular form. You can understand why he says a lot of things. But he doesn't follow the ijma of the Salaf. He doesn't believe it to be binding. And contemporary Salafism, the other half of it, Bin Baz's of the world and Ibn Uthaymeen's, they believe to follow the ijma of the Salaf. But there are so many contradictions of it, it's really frightening. And the minimum is whoever goes against an ijma has violated the way of Ahl Sunnah, has violated the way of the Salaf. whether they are accused of being innovators or deviants, that's another question. That has another set of rules. So they don't follow the Salaf. What they do is they take the Qawl al-Raji, the preferred opinion of Ibn Baz, or the preferred opinion of Ibn Taymiyyah, or the preferred opinion of Al-Albani, or of Ibn Taymiyyah, for example, or of Ibn Abdul Wahhab, and project that and say that is the way of the Salaf. On those things that contemporary Salafism distinguishes itself from mainstream Sunni Islam, on those issues, you will find that it's not because of an ijma. In fact, you might find the Salafis violating an ijma or violating the agreed upon practice of the scholars. Homework for yourselves. You don't have to hand it in to me. You don't even have to do it, but just homework if you haven't done it already. Find one imam from the great imams of the Salaf who ruled that Taraweeh prayer, it's preferred to pray 8, preferred. You can pray anything, you can pray 2 million, you can pray 2, but it's preferred to pray 8. We find no single mujtahid imam from early Islam, from the time of the students of the Sahaba onwards, ever ruled that Taraweeh prayer, the preferred number is 8. We have no such number in our history books. We have 20, we have 36, and from 3 of them we have 16. Leaving the 16ers because they weren't imams of fiqh. The 20s and 36 is all that we have.
Sheikhna,
Yes.
I'm gonna ask you to maybe wrap up in the next 3 or 4 minutes. Only because I know that they have lots of questions, and we don't want to keep you past your time. They have the time, but I'm not taking yours.
So does Salafism follow the Salaf? The short answer to that is no. 2, Salafism as it sees itself. When Sheikh al-Fawzan, who's considered to be really he's the flag carrier of the Salafi Dawah in our age, by admission of probably most Salafis today. He certainly is the inheritor of Bin Baz, and there are some recorded fatwas of Bin Baz. Who should we turn to after you? And he explicitly mentions Sheikh al-Fawzan by name. Sheikh al-Fawzan, therefore, being representative of that way, when he is asked who are the safe sect, he says the Salafis and none other. Okay, Salafism sees itself as the only saved sect. Whereas, by contrast, normative Hanbali Athari creed, we're talking about the Athari creed as it's been practiced for the last 600, 700, 800 years, even though it hasn't had much of a voice. Somewhere around about the 9th, 10th Islamic century, Hanbali Athari scholarship was clear that Ahl Sunnah are the Atharis, the Ash'aris, and the Maturidis, even though there are some 3 serious differences between them in creed. There are some 3 serious differences, irreconcilable until the Mahdi comes and sorts it out. But still, these are 3 schools under one creedal banner. That was the official Hanbali position by its great scholars in its crystallizing period. Salafism sees itself to be Ahl Sunnah, the safe sect, barring none, and every other Muslim group is deviant and misguided to some degree or the other, which largely counts for its attitude towards other Muslims. Thirdly, how do Salafis see the rest of the Muslims? There's enough proof here, but I'm going to just mention it in 2 broad categories. Salafis have 2 outlooks. Early on in the time of Ibn Abdul Wahhab, up until Sheikh Muhammad ibn Ibrahim, the former Mufti of Saudi Arabia, before Bin Baz. From that period up until Mufti Muhammad ibn Ibrahim, rahmatullah alayh, that period of say 100 and 10 years, 120 years, or however long, the majority view of the Salafis was that the majority of the Ummah are kuffar. They are unbelievers. The majority of Ummah have apostatized. Ibn Abdul Wahhab believed that. We don't need to quote his antagonists. We can quote him himself, saying that everyone in Makkah and Medina in my age, in Syria, the whole of the Turks, the Ottomans, they are mushriks. I mean, his words wasn't kuffar, his words were they were mushriks outside of the fold of Islam. It is an obligation upon the true Muslim to outwardly show enmity, hatred, and vehemency against them. And this continued to be the dominant fatwa, that the majority of the Ummah are outside of the fold of Islam, are apostates. Salafism held this to be the case up until Ibn Baz's time, roughly about Bin Baz's time. We're talking about now around about the end of the 1960s, definitely by the 1970s, where slowly and steadily the dominant opinion of Salafi ulama became that the majority of the Muslims have fallen into major shirk, but we won't say that they're all mushriks, all kuffar. We will say that they are deviant innovators. And that continues to be, barring one or two major Salafi scholars, that tends to be the view today. The average Salafi doesn't necessarily know this. The average Salafi might be shocked if you say to him, actually, Ibn Abdul Wahhab said A, B, C, D. No, he said, no, you're lying. That's not true. He could never have made takfir upon all of the majority of the ummah. Or the ulama couldn't have done this, or blah, blah, couldn't have said that. They're really shocked. Why? Because they sincerely believe otherwise. They're naive and don't know anything else. Then there is a group of Salafis who do know this, but they say, for the sake of the dawah, we won't tell even our Salafi brothers, let alone non-Salafis, because, you know, if we start telling them the raw truth, they might all run away. So we need to get them in and slowly prime them. And then there is a group of diehards who've always said, no, we'll tell it as it is. And they tell it as it is, or as they think it is. And, you know, those type of Salafis are really good Salafis because, you know, what they confront you with is what they really are. And I like that. I'd rather be punched in my nose in front of my face than be stabbed behind my back. Because with those type of people, you just kind of like, you know what you're getting. So there are those Salafis who will, even today, hold on to the original pure Salafi fatwas of Ibn Abdul Wahhab and not the kind of tainted, government-sieved fatwas, as they say, of more recent Salafi scholars. And that's an intra-Salafi issue itself. But that's the attitude of Salafis as they see the rest of the Muslims. Either they're all kuffar, the majority of them kuffar, unless you follow their tawheed and their creed and their way, or you're from deviant Muslims. And the fourth thing, Ibn Abdul Wahhab and mass takfir, I'll leave that because I'm pretty much sure there's enough online to kind of chase up. Other than one thing, in the beginning, Ibn Abdul Wahhab is clear. He's not joking. He's not lying. He says, look, those who say that I make mass takfir upon people, they're lying. I don't do that. And he didn't. He's not playing a game. He didn't. But as Aba Butain, Sheikh Aba Butain, one of the great Wahhabi Salafi scholars of the Najd, 100 years ago, he said that was in the beginning of Ibn Abdul Wahhab's dawah. When the dawah got underway and the message spread out, then it was justifiable to make mass takfir, and Ibn Abdul Wahhab made takfir on a whole town, on whole cities, and in at least one case, a whole country or a whole empire. And it's still there, his fatwas, in Ad-Durr al-Saniyya, which are the fatwas of the Najdiyya, printed in Riyadh and online actually now. That's really Salafism. contemporary Salafism, it is problematic. Individual Salafis have made a transition to a more normative way. Some individual Salafism have left Islam altogether. Some individual Salafis have been so scarred by the extremism, they still don't know where they are. And then some individual Salafis, they've left this bickering, they've left attacking other Muslims, and they're just getting on with their 9-to-5 job, keeping up their prayers and trying to raise their children on godliness. We accept the nuances, but as a concept, contemporary Salafism has no connection with real Salafism in any theological sense. And Allah knows best.
Barakallahu feekum. Saha, I think you need some more water, Sidna. Okay, so there's a lot there. Alhamdulillah. We're very grateful to Sheikh Surkheel for going into such depth and detail in this regard. I'm conscious of his time. So what we're going to do right now, we're going to take one round of questions. And I'm going to ask you to make your questions incredibly brief. Okay, please, incredibly brief, because we don't have him for a great deal of time. One question, please, not more. No comments. Just a brief question so that we can get as much as possible. We'll group them all together so that Sheikh Surkheel can answer them in one shot. And depending on how many hands I see, okay, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, that's it. All right, so we're gonna do 6 questions. Okay, just because of time, because there'll be a lot to get through. So Bismillah. Very quickly. Please.
Thank you so much. I want to know what prompted you to leave Salafism.
Okay, that's one.
My question is, what do you see the future of Salafism within the Muslim Ummah looking like?
My question is, what do you think is the regional cause of this exclusivist ideology on both sides, whether it be Salafism, Wahhabism, or even like Ahbash, who kind of do the same thing in the name of Sufism?
Can I see one of you?
In regard to Ahl-al-Athar or Hadith,
Okay.
in regard to the Ahl-al-Athar or Hadith, like Albani, for example, Albani never claimed that he is a Faqih, even though he had certain things he talks about it. I know that Shani when he came into the idea of
Sorry, Dr. Hisham, could you just repeat that question to me again?
If you could just ask the brief question, but loudly, but very briefly.
Athar, Hadith, and so on. Not every Athar Hadith is Faqih, vice versa.
So there's no question.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I still can't.
No, it's okay. I'll explain.
And you had one, and then so go ahead, and then we've got one. Okay.
During the time when you were starting to get in your studies, back in the 70s, going into the 80s, there was a campaign pretty much worldwide to engage with different communities. And it happened, particularly like within African American, West African community. So just in your coming out of that mind state and possibly your work and other people since then, what do you find to be the most effective means of helping young people and others who have been indoctrinated in this to start changing their way of thinking and helping to correct them in a positive manner?
Okay.
Sure.
I like that question.
What is the how has the idea of showing outward vehemence and hatred to those who are considered to be deviant, has that how do you see that being moderated today?
And Hamza, you got the last one. Sorry. Hamza.
Is there any record of Abdul Wahab ever showing any level of regret with regard to his takfir
Okay.
to anyone.
Do you mind if I take the last two first, simply because they both have short answers?
You take them however you want, and you're
Okay.
not obliged to answer all of them, but we would appreciate if you would. But just one more second, very quick.
Yeah, I just had one question. So you said that early Hanbali scholars considered the Asharis, the Maturidis and the Asharis to be from Ahl Sunnah. You didn't say which scholars, so just wanted to.
Okay.
Perfect.
Imam Tabrani is one. Thank you. As it's all yours. Bismillah.
All right, Bismillah. Okay, as regards to, did Sheikh Ibn Abdul Wahhab, rahmatullahi alayhi wa anhu, ever show any remorse or regret for his fatwas of takfir? As far as I know, not at all. There is nothing written from him that we have that ever suggests that. Secondly, his sons, and more particularly his grandsons, whom he tutored, some of whom became the leading Salafi Wahhabi Imams of the time, continued in their making takfir, attributing the source of the takfir to Ibn Abdul Wahhab. What we do have is that within 7 or 10 years, one needs to go back to the history books to be more precise, Ibn Abdul Wahhab was getting a little bit frustrated with Muhammad ibn Saud, the Amir, in their jihad campaigns. They called it jihad, but we would call it civil war, because when Muslims fight Muslims, they're not jihad. But if you make takfir on them, then obviously they're not Muslims as far as you're concerned. For some reason, he was very dissatisfied with what was going on. Some have suggested, oh, he didn't like the takfir, but Muhammad ibn Saud wasn't doing the fatwas. He was just doing the amirship and the army and the booty collection and whatever. It was Ibn Abdul Wahhab doing the takfir. So he retreats from public life for the next 30, 40 years, and he just writes books and fatwas and teaches and whatever. He doesn't go out on these campaigns. But that actually is not a proof that he had any remorse, because we see the continued unbroken chain of legacy through one generation of Wahhabi scholarship to another in written form up till our time. So the answer would be no. He did not retract or have remorse, and Allah knows best. Secondly, names of, if I mentioned early Hanbali Athari scholars said Ahl Sunnah 3 groups, and I'm mistaken. I was meant to say later Hanbali scholars came to this thing, later as in the 10th Islamic century onwards, last 400, 500 years. And scholars like Ibn Abdul Baqi and Imam al-Safarini, rahmatullah alayh, are from amongst them. You might possibly see this also in one of the earliest Hanbali scholars, Qadi Abu Ya'la, but that takes a little bit of like kind of looking into. But the other two that I mentioned, and it's now the official position of Athari Hanbali Creed, as it's been for the last 400 or 500 years, it's the official position. We have official fatwa positions. This is the Mu'tamad Mashhur of the madhab, the Mu'tamad, the relied upon. Then there are these other fatwas. And we have the Mu'tamad, the relied upon position in books of creed or Aqidah. And this is one of the positions. So those would be two names off the top of my head. There was another short question. I think the brother just before the Ibn Abdul Wahhab question said it. I can't remember, but let me take the question which the brother mentioned.
Yeah, that was your question.
Yeah. So has there been any moderation, you know,
Yes. Moderation in the concept of what they call what they call wala bara, loving and hating for the sake of Allah. Yes, there is. In fact, it is, I would be very surprised outside of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I would be very surprised for any Salafi communities around the globe to be enacting this wala and bara, openly showing hostility from 9/11 on, from 9/11 onwards, from the beginning of this century. However, prior to that, you would find, and the only people that you might find now are clearly ISIS, whose pedigree is the most authentic pedigree of Wahhabi teachings currently in vogue. They are closer to the real deal than anyone else on the face of this planet. Okay, because they said, let's bypass the subduing of Salafi Wahhabi scholarship by the state, and let's go directly to the fatwas of the real deal people, Ibn Abdul Wahhab, Abdurrahman ibn Hassan, Aba Batain, and the great major landmarks of Wahhabi Salafi scholarship prior to the coming of the third Saudi state. But you'll either find people like ISIS, Daesh, who uphold this view, or you might find one or two people in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia above a certain age, in the 40s, 50s, 60s, that might still do this, but very isolated. Otherwise, two things. It seems to me that some of the slightly younger Salafi Mashayikh throughout the late 90s and the early 2000s did a lot to bring it back to the balance by saying, look, there is a religious hate in principle, and there is a religious love in principle. Religiously, we're not allowed to love any non-Muslim because of their religion. Even if they're our parents, we can't love them because they are non-Muslims. But they, for example, if you're a convert and you have non-Muslim parents, we may love them naturally, hub tib'i, because they just have to be nice people, and just naturally you have your bond with your parents. We don't love them religiously because that will be kufr, but we love them naturally, and that is in keeping with what Imam al-Qurtubi says in his tafsir, what Ibn al-Qayyim says in his fatwas about natural love is not the love that has been forbidden to show non-Muslims. Natural love is you just can't help loving people. You can't help loving that kind non-Muslim, but you only love them not for their disbelief or for their rebellion against Allah. That would be kufr itself. So no, there has been a good movement in that. However, it's always tentative because one just has to open up Sheikh Ibn Uthaymeen's commentary on the three Islamic principles, Usul al-Thalatha, or get hold of Ibn Baz's commentary, or open up some of the smaller commentaries from the earlier scholars that are still available in English, and you'll see it there in HD, in 5D, blazing there. And therefore, if someone wants to revive that, there's no stopping it. But it would probably take courageous, brave souls to do that. So we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for small mercies. Yeah, and the truth is, even though we have a Black Afro-Caribbean communities up and down the UK, and they are earlier communities than the Asian communities in the UK. They were here like at least 10 years earlier than us. I'm not talking Muslim, I'm just about just communities. The Black Muslim communities of the United States, the earliest communities that the US have, severely undermined by Asian communities, and I sense still not accorded the I don't know if respect is the right word, that the acknowledgement that the Black Muslim communities deserve in the US. I don't know the specific psyches of what happens when someone comes out of one of those communities. And the people, the people of Makkah know best their mountain paths. Meaning that if you've been part of that community, you're part of that community, you will understand it better. I, as an Englishman, with Asian English roots, of a particular mentality and a particular mindset, even if I grew up as I did with Rastas, okay, with Rastafarians, which is my upbringing, quite different to most of my other Muslim friends. I don't have the social skill or the psychology to understand what happens. But I do understand some general things. When people come out of something extreme, they normally lose their trust and their bearings. It normally is baby and bath water. So the first thing that needs to be done is not telling them or wagging our finger at them. It's trying to understand them and trying to make them understand that I am trying to understand. And I'm with you, my brother. I'm with you, my sister. As regards to, bringing them further in, it seems to me, and this is not a fatwa, this is just, if you disagree with me, you can throw my views against the wall, as they say. It seems to me, don't try to convince a fairly strong Salafi or someone who's been a fairly strong Salafi with people like Al-Ghazali, people like some Sufi sheikh, or people with this, when they have no connection with them, but maybe convince them with Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah in his more moderate fatwas, or with some of the Hanbali scholarship that they might identify with. Because our goal isn't to slap them. These are Muslim brothers, these are people of sisters, these are people of Iman. And I suggest, I'm not making a claim, I suggest the so-called traditional Islam posse seem not to be showing much tasawwuf, much suluk, tazkiyah, Sufism, akhlaq, because it seems like just because I have been punched below the belt and the ref hasn't seen it, it doesn't mean that when I get the chance, I too should punch below the belt. No, idfa billati hiya ahsan, repel evil with that which is better. I have been punched below the belt a number of times. But I'm trying to do this lillah, for Allah. And there is a person who has the Adamic potential inside of him, not just as to become a Muslim, because he's already a Muslim, alhamdulillah, she's already a Muslim. They already love the Prophet, or at least they love his sunnah. They had an idea of being attached to Allah's Sharia. They knew that salvation was to journey to God. I just need to connect them back to a more moderate understanding of what that journey entails through signs and beacons of hope in more traditional scholarship. So rather than take Ibn Taymiyyah's fiercest views and run with them, why not look at the flip side of Ibn Taymiyyah that the Hanbalis did? Rather than try to convince this Salafi to become a Shafi or a Hanafi, why not just take the Hanbali view, which is he doesn't have to follow a madhab, but he can't pick and choose according to his whims and desires. He has to follow qualified scholarship. And then from there, you might find people who say, you know what, I would like to follow a madhab. The Hanbali madhab is the only existing madhab where the dominant standard view is it is not an obligation for a layperson to follow a madhab from A to Z in its specifics. It is just the preferred option. If our desire is to draw them close back and reconnect them to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, rather than, they are vulnerable, I can punch them, then we will know what to do by Allah's guidance and Allah's inspiration. If it's just the ego getting its own back, then it's not a discussion that you and I really should venture into. The Black Muslim communities of the US, the earliest Muslim communities, have their own history, their own journey, their own talent, and they know best how best to be reached out. Just as a side point, one of the sheikhs in Canada told me that when he came to the US back in 2010, 2008, he was doing these courses for an institution, an Islamic organization. And a lot of the professional, what do you call, you don't call them Asian in this state, you call them Desi, Indian, Pakistani kind of background type of people. Many of them were coming to these courses, and the course was a lot in terms of fees and money. And these are people who've got, a middle class background, their parents are middle class or upper middle class or whatever. And he said a number of people from the Black Muslim community came to me and said, you know, one, we can't afford classes like these, courses like these, and secondly, I remember this just hit me like a brick. Secondly, why do the sheikhs have to come in such expensive cars with these expensive watches? And I know they don't mean to do it, but it just rubs it into us of the kind of gap of the struggles that we have to go through. The Prophet ﷺ heard the voices of the vulnerable. He responded to the voices of the vulnerable. And he lived a life like those who were vulnerable. We don't have to do the last bit. The Sunnah doesn't say we have to do the last bit. We have to do the first two bit. If our Islam is a disconnect from people, then it's not really Sunnah, then is it? And we're still Muslims. It's not really Sunnah, though, is it? It's not living for the poor or living for the vulnerable. And that's not to say everybody in that community is poor or vulnerable or whatever needs handouts. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying there are struggles there that we will never know unless we're part of it. And he who feels it, he who knows it will feel it. And Allah knows best. I can't remember the other questions unless I get a prompt. And I'll be shorter, inshallah.
What was your question again?
I wanted to know
You said
why-
very quick questions, right?
Why you left?
Why did you leave the da'wah?
Well, and mine was.
Yeah,
what
you
is-
know, it's a really
And also, what's the future of the da'wah?
all right. So why did I leave the dawah? It's, you know, it's a subjective thing. There were just one or two issues that I felt had gone against an ijma. And then I found more I looked into ijma, the more I found contemporary Salafism out of sync. And at some point, I thought I couldn't carry on with it. It was okay, because at some point, some people guessed what was happening and they, as they say, pushed me off the manhaj. So it was kind of, it worked out quite well. But that was back, you know, that was a long time ago. More importantly, we don't I know it's the done thing nowadays, but we should try our best not to talk too much about ourselves. It might be inspiration, it might not be, because the glory needs to be for Allah. And understanding ijma, where there are ijma violations. This is talking about the glory of God or glory of God's religion. Otherwise, mine's a personal experience. It doesn't mean this or that. It has no binding proof in and of itself. And it's interesting or it's not interesting, but it's kind of an irrelevancy in the greater scheme of things. The last question is very important though. Where is this heading? Not being pessimistic, but seasoning my optimism with a little bit of realism. Normally when innovations flower, you can never get them back in the box. Once the cat's out the bag, right, you can never get it back in the bag. You can never get the thing back in the box. It's always going to be out there. It might lay dormant like cancer cells, but it just needs to trigger at the right time in the right place with the right people. And then it's active again. That's the case with all innovations, including the innovation of being anti-ijma in principle or even in practice, let alone takfir. And the takfir is because they say, oh, the majority of the Muslims, they are or agree to the concept of grave worshipping. And that in itself is an issue, but it's just so not true. The humbly position on someone who believes that only Allah is the doer, that, you know, provides benefit and harm, life and death, healing, and so on and so forth, and provisions, whatever. Someone who believes it's only Allah, but supplicates to the dead in the grave for whatever reason, that the dead in the grave is a means that Allah has made. He miraculously can hear by Allah's permission or any other of those things. The Hanbali school has no school view. There's no view in the madhab, but early views of the madhab are that it's haram, it's ghayr mashru' to do so. Okay, that's the position that Ibn Taymiyyah took as well. He didn't say that they were mushriks. He said they were Muslims doing something haram. Or worse still, he said they could be doing something that is a bid'ah. but he never made takfir upon them, and that became the norm of Hanbali scholarship from earlier than him and from after him until Ibn Abdul Wahhab came and said something else. Point being is, innovation's always going to be there. They're subdued or not. However, age, experience, just raising children, just keeping your head above water in this aggressive secularism, aggressive consumerist society, kind of polishes off some of our rough edges. And so some of the Salafi brothers have toned down because of that, and that's good. If they don't go further than that by rejecting everything, it's not a disaster. That they're now no longer mouthing it off against other Muslims, and they just focus on their family and their children. It's a good thing, inshallah, and we make dua for them, and they are our brothers and sisters in Islam. As regards to their speakers, then there are those who might want to sit down with you and discuss, and there are those who don't. As regards to those who don't, leave them. Allah is their Lord. As regards to those who do, if you feel you have knowledge and that you could be respected by them because of your knowledge, and not on the internet, not on social media, face to face, so that the warmth of brotherhood can be seen, or sisterhood as the case may be, then rather than talk about boundary issues, convince them of Mawlid, convince them of tasbih beads, convince them of tasawwuf, convince them of following a madhab, convince them, leaving all of that. Just get to the ijma point first. Say, look, explain to me when you follow Salaf, and not because you're trying to trick them up, you're trying to help them reassess themselves. When you say it following the Salaf, what do you mean? If you get down to the ijma and they agree in concept of ijma, but saying, but Sheikh Al-Albani said he doesn't believe in that, but you take him as one of the 3 great scholars, and then there are views against the ijma, and though you might not agree with it, but you consider it part of the legitimate differences within Salafism. How can that be when it's an innovation? And if to get to that place, you might just throw in some things. Well, did you know Ibn Taymiyyah didn't consider the celebrators of Mawlid to be deviants. He just said that they were wrong as a fiqh issue. Did you know that Sheikh Ibn Abdul Wahhab, he said the issue of tawassul bin Nabi, or Allah accept my dua due to your Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, tawassul bin Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this is hadihi mas'ala fiqhiyya, is a fiqh issue, not a creedal issue, but contemporary Salafism today has made it an issue of aqeedah or creed. How do you square that? Get them to think by using their own people that they will be accepting of, rather than bring someone out of the air and they don't know who they are. And why?
Sayyidi?
Oh, sorry, why? Because we're unlikely to have a long argument, and we're likely to make some inroads into the heart, and Allah knows best.
Shukran. Surkheel, thank you very much. We've kept you over time. Before we wrap up, the president of Bayan walked into the room towards the end of your session and wanted to give you salam. I'm not sure if you can see him or not. With me in the back.
Allah bless you. Allah bless all of you.
We really appreciate your time, your generosity. I'm sure we could be here for another hour or 2 and barely scratch the surface. But we deeply appreciate the flexibility that you had with us and your charity with us, alhamdulillah. And we send condolences to you again. May Allah bless your wife with the highest stations, inshallah. Barakallahu feekum. Thank you so much. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Jazakumul khair wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you.